All right, I'm live. And yesterday we talked about chronic inactivity plaguing the sport of boxing. Today we're going to talk about another thing plaguing the sport of boxing, and that's sanctioning bodies. And it's not all negative when it comes to sanctioning bodies. Some of that is positive. And like everything, man, like everything with an alphabet in front of it, every organization that involves an alphabet, it starts off with good intentions, right? And that's what we'll learn as this program goes on. And then it's corrupted, right? It's always corrupted by someone at some point, hijacked, and then turns into something else. And once it turns into something else, there's no stopping it, as we'll look at when we talk about the history of sanctioning bodies throughout this program. Had fun talking about chronic inactivity yesterday with D-Style Boxing. And make sure you hit that like as y'all come in. And if you're watching this in the archives, hit the like below. Make sure to hit the like below, and make sure if you're subscribing to hit the alerts. That way you know when I'm going live. But calixboxing.com, calixboxing 2.0 here on YouTube, and calixboxing 2 over on Twitter, trying to allow some people to come in here before we start to heat this thing up, because this will heat up. This will heat up. As everybody knows, I'm the belts gone wild guy. I like talking about the wild belts. Love exposing the wild belts. Did anybody scratch their head the other day when Leo Santa Cruz, after 3.5 years, was mandated to fight Lee Wood all of a sudden? Did anybody scratch their head? Gennady Golovkin was mandated after he fights Canelo Alvarez within 120 days to fight Erislandy Lara. Because the middleweight division, as I'll show later, has been a dumpster juice division. The dumpster juicest of dumpster juice divisions. It's been absolutely awful. Absolutely awful. And part of the reason it is because the sanctioning bodies have a duty to clean up these divisions. They have a duty to do that. We as fans do. We have a duty to demand the correct fights. It's all working parts, right? We have to work together in order to clean up these divisions and clean up the sport of boxing. The fans have to be educated and ask and demand for the correct fights. The sanctioning bodies have to hear us and mandate the correct fights to be made at the right time. And at the same time, the promoters and network execs and the managers have to do the right thing, not only by the fighters, but by boxing as a whole, because if not, this isn't a sustainable sport. It's not going to be a sustainable sport if we don't work together. But was anybody scratching their head that on the same day, the WBA decided to mandate Leo Santa Cruz to fight Lee Wood after 3.5 years of Leo Santa Cruz, and more on that in a minute, of not fighting in the division in which he has a belt? And then Gennady Golovkin being mandated to fight Erislandy Lara within 120 days of fighting Canelo Alvarez. I wasn't. And the reason I wasn't is because on the same day, I believe the day before, the WBA was caught in a pay-for-play scandal in which they're, through a third-party agency, collecting money from fighters, managers, possibly promoters, in order to climb them up the rankings inorganically. And if we look at the history of sanctioning bodies, this has happened before in which guys are caught. We know all 4 sanctioning bodies are doing this, by the way. And I'll talk about the 140-pound division later on if you don't believe me, because a lot of shadiness going on in the 140-pound division. 2 vacant belts right there right now. We'll talk about that. Shout out Chicano Prophet in the building. Y'all make sure to hit the like button. Recovering from potential Rona. Need some boxing in my life right now. Bless you, good sir. Wish you well, man. Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, hit it all up. Hit it all up. I can speak from experience. Hit all that stuff up. OD on it. It's going to help you. Shout out OJ22. Let's talk about the good part of the sanctioning body before we get into negative and get into current events that tie into particularly the WBA and its corruption and the history of boxing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link a video which I've referenced several times. I often go back to it, an educational video on the history of the sanctioning bodies. It's a 39-minute video, simplifies all of this, and it gives you like a Cliff's Notes of the sanctioning bodies, where they came from, when they started, why they started, or why they said they started, the amount of belts that each of them have. And Michael Montero put it out, and he put it out about 4 years ago. And I often reference this video and go back to it. Now, there are books that you can read if you want to get more complex into it. And believe me, I'm not always in the mood, but I often go back to those books as well. If you want to get deeper into the sanctioning bodies and who they are, their history, all this good stuff. But first, let's talk about the positives, because the sanctioning bodies, as the promoters, managers, these are all necessary evils. I'm not against the 4-belt sanctioning body system. I'm not against it, because when they work together, it's a good thing. Unfortunately, seldom do they work together. But when they do, when we follow this blueprint to undisputed, and we'll talk about the sustainability of defending undisputed once you get it later on in the program. But when you work your way there, when they work together, it's a beautiful thing. And the reason you need 4 sanctioning bodies is because boxing is such a global sport. If we look at, and this is why, if you go to my website, calingsboxing.com, I reference how many countries have how many belts. And I'm only talking about the real belts, not the Reggie belts. And we'll get into those as well. The real belts. And there are 68, is that right? 64. No, 60, 17, 34, 68 real belts in boxing, not counting ring. 68. 17 weight classes, not counting bridger weight, and then 4 major belts per division. 68. All right. So if you count that up, you have countries representing these major belts, and that's a good thing. And the sanctioning bodies have made that possible, because if it weren't for the sanctioning bodies and the mandatory process, fighters from different countries may not have gotten these shots with fighters with a ton of consonants in their name, fighters that people in America do not follow. It's become a global sport. So it's good that Uzbekistan has 2 belts. Australia has a belt. Would Jai Opatai have gotten a shot at Maris Bredes if it weren't for the mandatory process? Would Cambosos have gotten a shot at Teofimo Lopez and got 3 of his belts for Australia had it not been for the mandatory process? Julius Ndongo goes to Russia, wins a belt through the mandatory process, then goes to Scotland, I believe, to unify, or the UK to unify. And then he goes to Omaha to become undisputed. Without the mandatory process, that's not possible. So when it works, it works. And when it works for the fighters who are deserving, it's a beautiful thing. As we'll talk about later, the ranking process often, as the WBA will show right now, is corrupt, as is everything. But Congo has a belt. France has a belt. Australia has a belt. Russia has 4. Kazakhstan has 2. Venezuela is represented. Japan has 8 belts. Venezuela has a belt. Argentina, Puerto Rico. So you have Thailand with 2 belts. Philippines. You have multiple countries on multiple continents represented within the sport of boxing with major belts because of the sanctioning bodies. And that's a good thing. When the 4-belt system works, it works. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have these belts. And, we're going to talk about the Reggies later and how they cloud the process. But when we talk about the belts, when you have 1 major belt for each sanctioning body within each division, and the IBF does a good job of that, the WBO does a good job of that, the WBC and the WBA are awful when it comes to that. Especially the WBA. WBC will have a silver, a diamond, an international, and then they'll reward these fighters certain belts just to get their name in a promotion. Canelo. The WBA has a regular, a super, an interim, a Latin American champ, a North American champ, an American champ, a continental champ, an intercontinental champ, an oceanic championship. So if you live close to an ocean, you can fight for the oceanic belt. I believe that's what it means anyway. A Pan-African belt. And this is when it starts to get cloudy. This is when you start to scratch your head. And I'm not saying all of those are recognized by legit boxing people. That's not what I'm saying. But even if you talk about the belts that are recognized by legit boxing people, you start to get into the WBA Gold World Belt. the WBA Super World Belt, the WBA World Belt. Heavyweight has 3 WBA champions. And that's not counting all the other ones I mentioned just now. All the other Reggie belts. Cruiserweight. 147, Spence has the Super World. Ortiz has the Gold World. Stanionis has the World. And this is just those 3 major belts, if we're going to call them major belts. And we all know Super World, the super duper world, is the main one. And that's why we talk about Tank Davis having Reggie belt, because Tank Davis has the regular belt, the world belt. And Haney has the super world belt. He has the ones that matter. And the problem with that is people say, well, since Tank has the world belt and Haney has the super world belt, well, that puts Tank in position to fight Devin Haney at some point when he becomes the man. That makes him the mandatory. No. That's what the mandatory process is for. That's what the rankings are for. Once you become number 1 in the rankings, you are now the mandatory to fight Devin Haney. And the reason they do this is with the regular belt, the super belt, the interim belt, the Latin American Championship, the North American Champion, the Pan-African Championship, the Continental, the Intercontinental, the Oceanic. With all of those comes sanctioning fees. Sanctioning fees. Sanctioning fees. And the reason the WBA and WBC does what they do is because of sanctioning fees. It all comes down to sanctioning fees. They can say what they want. The reason they reward so many champions or award so many champions is because of the sanctioning fees. And I saw Floyd rail against this last month, but Floyd is the wrong one to be. He's the right one, but he's the wrong one. He's the right one in that he has a big platform. So he's a guy who can clean all this up. He has a huge platform. All of this up or go a long way in doing it. If he won, but he just wants the virtue signal. It's the same thing when it came to clean boxing program in 2008, 2009, when Floyd was railing against drugs in boxing. But at the same time, he had fighters in his own camp getting popped for PEDs. If Floyd really wanted to clean up the sport of boxing, he would clean up his own house. He would clean up his own gym. And if Floyd was serious about all the Reggie belts and railing against sanctioning fees, what Floyd would do is say, hey, we got this fighter named Tank Davis at 135. He doesn't have the super championship. He has the regular championship. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell him to drop the belt because we want to lead by example. And when he fights on Showtime and pay-per-view, what we're going to do is we're going to tell pay-per-view, we're going to tell Al Bernstein and his crew that don't promote our guy as a 3-division champion because he's really only won a championship in 1 division. So we're going to promote him as a 1-division champ. We're not going to promote him as the champion at lightweight because these are Reggie belts. We're going to drop the Reggie belt. We don't want to pay the sanctioning fee, but that's not what Floyd wants. Floyd wants the virtue signal, and Floyd wants to benefit from the same system that he's railing against. Rules for thee, not for me. That's what it comes down to for Floyd. So Floyd's going to benefit from the system with Tank Davis. He's going to pay the sanctioning fee because with paying the sanctioning fee, he can promote his guy as a 3-division champion, and he can promote his guy as the lightweight champion on Showtime. And this is the issue we have with boxing is there are too many hypocrites. There's too much corruption. And this is why this thing is cloudy. And this is why I always say on this channel, even after great fights comes confusion when it comes to the casual fans. You ever sit and watch? And I did it with Ryan Garcia versus Fortuna last week in Gulf Shores, Alabama, when I'm on vacation. And I got to watch it in front of casuals because there's only one TV in the place. And I'm trying to explain to them that, yeah, Ryan Garcia is a great talent at lightweight. He's rated high, all this good stuff. Well, is he going to fight for the championship? No, because this guy's with that promoter, that guy's with that promoter. Even after great fights comes confusion. And we have to simplify everything for everybody. That's the world we live in. We live in the Kardashians world. People want simplification. People want stuff that's easy to follow. This is too complex. I got to give it to the IBF and the WBO, as at least they're corrupt. They're corrupt, but at least they keep the belt system a little easier to follow. There's not a regular champion, a super champion, an interim champion, a Latin American champion, a Pan-African champion, an intercontinental champion, an oceanic champion. There's not all of that. That leads to too much confusion. So even if you have a great sport, even if you have great fights consistently, you still have that confusion that goes along with actually following the sport. Because when people follow a sport, they want to follow a sport. They want to follow it in its full length. They don't want to just say, oh, I just came here for the good fights. They want to be able to follow the sport and know who the champions are, where the divisions are. They want to be able to know that featherweight is at 126 pounds. And being that there are 17 weight classes, that's hard enough to follow. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating. But it comes down to sanctioning fees. It comes down to sanctioning fees. But imagine Leo Santa Cruz's surprise the other day when he gets a call from his manager saying, ring, ring, ring. He picks it up. He's chilling on his couch watching Netflix, and they tell him, look, remember when you fought at featherweight? You remember that? You remember when you fought at featherweight all those years ago? Yeah, I remember featherweight. You remember when you won that belt at featherweight? Yeah, I remember it. It's somewhere around here. I don't remember. Yeah, I remember winning it. Yeah, they want you to defend it. They're telling you that you have 24 hours to decide if you want to defend the belt. And he's like, what do you mean defend the belt? What does that mean? Well, there's a mandatory. He worked his way up, and you have to have a defense against the mandatory. What do you mean a mandatory? What do you mean defense? What does defense mean? That means you have to defend the belt you won. You have to fight in order to keep the belt that you won. And Leo Santa Cruz is just sitting there baffled, like, I have to do what? You mean I just can't keep this thing forever? I thought I just keep this thing. Nobody ever told me anything. You know, I'm just chilling with it. I'm just sitting here watching Netflix. It's in the trophy case over there. Nobody ever told me anything about defending a belt. I don't even fight at 126 anymore. What are you talking about? Yeah. You got 24 hours to decide if you want to defend your belt or not. Fight this guy over in the UK and defend your belt. And Leo Santa Cruz is just baffled. He hangs up the phone. He calls his family member. They tell me I got something about a defense. I got to defend. I have to fight to keep my belt. I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I thought I was just able to keep this thing forever. I thought I was just able to keep this thing. I thought I was just keeping it in the trophy case. So poor Leo Santa Cruz has to, after 3.5 years, defend his belt now. Poor Leo Santa Cruz. But imagine how corrupt that right there is, to where a guy can keep his belt for 3.5 years when he hasn't even been competing in that weight class. And think about, we talk about rules for thee, not for me. There's no way that a sanctioning body can keep consistency across the board through 17 weight classes if they're allowing a guy to keep a belt for 3.5 years, because I know they're not doing it for their other champions. So there's a reason they're doing that. And once again, it all circles back to corruption. And it didn't always used to be this way. I mentioned at the top, anything with an alphabet in it starts off with good intentions until it doesn't, until it becomes corrupted. And at that point is a snowball going downhill. You can't stop it. You can't stop it at that point. And it's this way with every sanctioning body that's ever come around. The WBA started off as the NBA in 1921. And the reason the NBA at the time, and it turned to the WBA in the 1960s, is because they felt that they had some guys that felt that the New York State Athletic Commission, which at the time boxing was a mostly northeastern U.S. sport, they felt that they were corrupt. So they were going to come and counteract that corruption. Remember, starts off with good intentions until it doesn't. So they wanted to counterbalance, and the first ever sanctioning body fight was the WBA or the NBA, Jack Dempsey versus Carpentier. And that was in 1921. It's the first sanctioned bout. 1962, it turns into the WBA as boxing became a more global sport. 1963, the WBC is founded. So then you have two sanctioning bodies. And then later on, you would have the IBF in 1983 would be created. And then in 1988, the WBO would be created. But in each case, each of them were for a reason. They were created to counterbalance the other one. The WBC felt like there was a pro-American bias, so they wanted to create a global sanctioning body to recognize other countries. The IBF felt like there was an anti-American bias, so we're going to create a sanctioning body and reward all big-name Americans, Larry Holmes, Marvin Hagler, Curry. So the IBF did that, and the WBO came after, and they started rewarding European champions. A lot of your European champions, like Joe Calzaghe. What are some of the other ones? Eubank, another one. A lot of these big European fighters were WBO champions, and that's how they gained their notoriety as a European outfit. And as they did this, it became a more global sport. And what I spoke about earlier, now you have 16 countries represented as real champions when it comes to the full sanctioning body. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But we talked about the corruption, the corrupt part of it. It started off good with good intentions, then it became corrupted. And how it became corrupted is, look at the IBF as an example. The IBF started out in 1983, the president Bob Lee. Bob Lee in 1989 ends up convicted for being paid to rank fighters under the table. And then he gets kicked out. So starts off with good intentions, then gets destroyed by the corruption. And you can talk about this with every single outfit. When the sanctioning bodies work how they're supposed to work, it's a beautiful system. It's a beautiful system. As I spoke about, all the different countries that are represented. Boxing is a global sport. You need it. You need it. But when it's bad, it's bad. When guys are climbing rankings, and I use 140 as an example right now, and then I'll get to comments because I don't want to lose my stream of thought. Josh Taylor wins all the belts at 140, and that's a beautiful thing. You want an undisputed champion. And by the way, you want an undisputed champion who can sustainably defend all 4 belts simultaneously. The issue that we have in boxing is once a guy becomes undisputed, it's not sustainable for him over a long period of time to defend all 4 belts, which is why I think we only have one case, Jermaine Taylor, of a guy becoming undisputed by beating the undisputed champion, because we just don't have examples of guys sticking around and defending all 4 belts simultaneously over a long period of time. So Josh Taylor fights Jack Catterall once he gets all 4 belts, and he says, look, I'll tell you what, I'm paying 11 to 12% of my overall purse to sanctioning fees to defend all 4 belts at one time. How am I supposed to do that? I'm already paying a manager, I'm paying a promoter, I'm paying a trainer, I'm paying a cut man, I'm paying a strength and conditioning coach, I'm paying taxes, and now I got to pay 11 and 12% in sanctioning fees of my overall purse. Not sustainable. And it comes back to what I talked about is the 4 sanctioning bodies have to work together in order to make something like that sustainable. They have to come together, work together to make for a better sport. And the problem with undisputed right now is once a guy becomes undisputed, he starts vacating belts because he doesn't want to pay all the sanctioning fees. Stupid mandatories get in the way of bigger fights. You also have, guys they don't want to deal with it, so they just drop all 4 belts and move up. Look at all the guys like Devin Haney's already saying, I want to go up to 140 at some point. Josh Taylor is saying, I got one more fight at 140 and I'm moving up to 147 after already dropping 2 belts after 1 defense. Canelo 168, then he moves up to 175 in the next fight when he has all 4 belts at 168. And we'll see how long he's able to simultaneously defend all 4 belts if the sanctioning fees decide that they're going to cut him some slack, if he's able to negotiate lesser sanctioning fees just to keep his belts because he's Canelo. But if you don't have that Canelo leverage, how do you sustainably defend all 4 belts when you 11 to 12% in sanctioning fees, 3% here, 3% WBA, 3% WBC, 3% WBO, 3% IBF, all in one fight. So Josh Taylor just decided, I'm dropping him. I'm dropping him. But when Josh Taylor was deciding that he wanted to move up to 147 from 140, what did Josh Taylor do? Or what did the sanctioning bodies do? There was going to be a vacuum that was going to be created, right? Josh Taylor's moving up from 140 to 147. So all 4 belts are going to drop. They're all going to become vacant. So 8 fighters at 140 are going to fight for these belts. 8 fighters are going to be rewarded because that's 4 belts, 2 fighters per belt fighting for the vacant titles. So what happens? When a sanctioning body sees something that goes wrong, they have to step in. Like I said, they were created to counterbalance the corruption in boxing until they became corrupt. So when these sanctioning bodies saw that Jack Catterall, most of the boxing public, 90%, felt like he beat Josh Taylor, one of these sanctioning bodies should have stepped in and said, no, wait a second. I know Josh Taylor wants to go elsewhere, but if Josh Taylor decides he wants to stick around at 140, he's going to have to fight this guy again. We got to do right by Jack Catterall. I know Jack Catterall is not a fun fighter. I get it. I get that there are more exciting fights out there, but he was wronged here. We all have common sense. So we have to step up and say, you know what, Josh, if you want to stick around, we're mandating that you fight a rematch against Jack Catterall. But they didn't do that. Not only did they not do that, they telegraphed that if all 4 of these belts drop, Jack Catterall is not getting a shot at any of them. He's not going back to the front of the line. He got his shot. He's not going back to the front of the line. He's not getting, not one of the 8 fighters at 140 getting a shot for any of these vacant shot belts. That screams corruption to me. That's a ranking system that is not working. And I'll give you a further example at 140. Regis Prograis, who a lot of us see as possibly the number 2 guy at 140, the second best. A lot of us felt like, and this isn't just New Orleans bias, a lot of us felt like he beat Josh Taylor over in Scotland. Didn't get the decision. He's not one of the 8 fighters that are going to fight for vacant belts. And not only that, one of the sanctioning bodies said that 2 to 3 fighters, I believe 4 fighters, are going to be able to come in for a 15-minute presentation as to why they feel they should fight for the belts. This all screams corruption within the ranking system, within the rating system. Screams corruption. So when I hear that the WBA is doing pay for play, is taking money under the table, it's not shocking. They're all doing it, but the WBA was stupid enough to get caught using the third party and getting caught. And a part of me is saying, even though I like the 4 sanctioning body system, it works when it works. A part of me is like, step these dudes' throats. When I hear that the Association of Boxing Commissions in America is saying, look, if this is true, and we're going to look into it, we're going to investigate. If this is true, we're going to kick the WBA out of America. Yeah, right. Where has the ABC been all this time? And where are they when it comes to the other sanctioning bodies? Where'd they go? So all of a sudden, they get caught. The ABC comes out of nowhere because a lot of us didn't even know they existed and says to this. And then the very next day, we start to get these mandates come out. And the reason we're getting these mandates come out, the reason we're getting Leo Santa Cruz has to fight Lee Wood all of a sudden, and he has 24 hours to decide. And Gennady Golovkin has 120 days to decide if he's going to fight Erislandy Lara after the Canelo fight. The reason we're getting these is because they're trying to distract you. They're trying to get your attention over here while the corruption's going on over here. It's out in the public. They don't want you focusing on this. They want you focusing on this over here. And it works. Let's get to some comments. My guy, Wheelchair Man John, when Mike Tyson got out of jail, he was the #1 contender. How? Shout out Anna Lee in the building. What's up, champ? CY in the building. To be fair, they're all kind of corrupt. They are. Santeo Media in the building. The WBA just got caught. Get yourself a frame for that poster, cheapskate. WBA corrupt as F. Have a shell company to take bribes, all laid out in a deposition. That's correct. OJ22 in the building, the Pan-African champion. And that's what it is, man. Like it's like Oprah, right? Remember the Oprah show when she was handing out those cars to the whole audience? You get a car. You get a car. You get a car. All the women are, oh my God, we're all getting cars. We're all going home with cars. That's the WBA. The regular champion, the super champion, the interim champion, the oceanic champion, the continental, the intercontinental, the Pan-African, the North American, the Latin American, the intercontinental. Oh my God, we're all getting belts. The WBA is sitting up there. You get a belt. You get a belt. You get a belt. Oceanic, transatlantic, trans-African, oceanic, the Antarctic belt. The Canadian belt. Oh my God, we're all getting belts. We're all going home with belts. That's what's happening. They're all going home with belts. Fighters you never even heard of have a belt. And now we have a ranking system that doesn't make any sense. Not only is it corrupted, but it's also clouded with all these belts mushed up in here. And it paints a cloudy picture, and we need a clear picture more than ever. 2022, I'm telling you, this is a low vibrational society that we live in, low vibrational world we live in. Everybody just scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, looking at Instagram models' booties, all this stuff. Nobody can pay attention to anything anymore. So now more than ever, boxing needs to simplify. Boxing needs to get back to the basics, because if not, it's going to survive. Look, it's a cockroach. I can cite articles from a century ago that said, oh, boxing's dying. Boxing died 50 years ago. Boxing's dying. This was when boxing was great. So of course they're going to say it now, but boxing's never going to die because it's an art form. But what I'm saying is it needs to thrive. It needs to thrive. If you use the example of a football game being played on, a basketball game being played on this block, a baseball game being played on this block, and a fight on this block, everybody's going to go towards the fight. Forget the basket. Dudes are dribbling over there. Who cares? There's a fight. There's a fight right there. And especially if fighting is mixed with basketball. That's what's missing with basketball. We need more fights in basketball. They're taking fights out of hockey now. We need more fights. But everybody gravitates towards the fight. I was watching a fight that was happening at Magic Kingdom before I came on Twitter. Somebody posted a fight at Magic Kingdom. Everybody gravitates towards the fight. But the boxing politics is so confusing. It mushes everything up so much that everybody's like, I don't even want to go over there. I don't even go over there. I don't even understand what's going on over there. Yeah, there's a fight, but it's all too confusing. It's all way too confusing. So I'm going to go over here to the football game. The product's way better. I'm going to go to the baseball game, basketball game. I'll catch the fight later, maybe. That's how messed up the politics of the sport are, that something that people naturally gravitate towards. We have a human nature to gravitate towards confrontation, towards fighting, two dudes throwing hands. It's a beautiful thing, combat. And people just stay away from it because all of this stuff that I mentioned is too confusing. It's 2022. We need to simplify. Low vibrational society. Everybody wants what's simple. Everybody's on the go. They need what's simple. It's already confusing with the networks now, at least, because especially as well, because I talked about it with D-Style earlier, or yesterday. I used to know as a boxing fan where to go for guys on the up and coming. I used to be able to follow their career on ESPN Friday Night Fights, on Showbox. I knew where to go, what time to go there. Friday nights, 9 to 11, ESPN Friday Night Fights, 11 to about 1 in the morning. We used to go to Showbox, and we used to see a level of competition that we liked in boxing. Good matchups, prospects on the rise. And then we go to championship boxing on HBO and Showtime on Saturday night. Now it's hard to see, even as a hardcore boxing fan, it's hard to know where to go for fights. So what do you think casuals are doing? You think casuals are going to all these platforms, signing up for all these platforms to see fights? They're not. They're not. We need to get back to the basics. We need to simplify, because people are just going to leave it. People are going to leave it. So I gave an example at 140. Let me show you the picture at 160 real quick. Look at this. Look at this stupidity right here. This is the most dumpster juice of dumpster juices divisions I've ever seen. Gennady Golovkin is a WBA super champion, so good for him. And he consolidated the IBF. He became, he unified over in Japan against Murata. And with Gennady Golovkin, it's been a mixed bag for him, because I like Gennady Golovkin. Overall, I'm a fan. Over the past couple years, before the Murata unification, not so much. It seemed like he was focused more on Canelo than handling his business at 160. But Golovkin is Golovkin. But look at this. You got a guy right here in Jamal Charlo. He has the WBC. Demetrius Andrade has the WBO. Jamal Charlo is supposed to fight Selecki after 13-month layoff. He pulls out of a fight. He pulls out of the fight due to a back injury. A week later, we see him on Instagram at the club, drunk, partying at the club, drunk. Didn't look like he had much of a back injury. Boo Boo Andre is supposed to fight Zach Parker at 168 back in May. He pulls out of the fight due to a shoulder injury, which, has anybody found out how serious the shoulder injury was? Because this is back in May, early May. So 2.5 months later, finally we get around to, hey, Boo Boo. Hey, knock on the door. Hey, Boo Boo. They're calling Boo Boo Andre up. Hey, you remember this WBO belt you have at 160? Yeah, it's time, bro. It's time. You got 30 days to decide what you're going to do. You got 30 days to decide if you want to fight Janabek or if you want to just vacate the belt and do whatever you want to do. But you got to do something. But this is what I'm talking about when it comes to cleaning up divisions. And when you don't do a good job of cleaning up divisions, this is what you get. You get a muddled picture, because look at Chris Eubank Jr. sitting at the top. Chris Eubank Jr. is talking about fighting, and he's the #1 contender. He's talking about fighting a 147-pounder at a 156-pound catch weight. And I get it, because there's a big fight over there, right? It's a legacy fight. Both of their fathers were big names. I get it. But he's a middleweight, not doing anything at middleweight. And not only that, after that fight, he's calling out Jake Paul. He's saying, hey, Jake, I know you're a cruiserweight, but I'll fight you at whatever division. So you have a #1 contender disinterested in doing anything in the division he's campaigning in. Jaime Munguia moves up from 154 to 160, and the Jamal Charlo fight looks like it's going to happen. And then the zone goes, no. And Showtime goes, no. We got network issues here. You got to fight this fight on Showtime. The zone's like, no. We want to fight it on the zone. We're not going to do cross network stuff. And the fight blows up. So that's the deal with Jaime Munguia. But what you have here is a picture that is not developing at all. You've got a WBC champion in Jamal Charlo who's been inactive for now 14 months, and we don't know what he's going to do. We have no idea what he's going to do. Is he going to stay at 160? He's going to move up to 168. Nobody knows, and nobody's asking. Boo Boo Andre finally gets the call, and he's got, 29, 28 days to decide if he's going to stay at middleweight, move up to super middleweight, if he's interested at all in keeping his WBO belt. But finally, the WBO at least says, look, we got to develop a picture here. Gennady Golovkin's going to have 120 days to fight Erislandy Lara, who has the WBA world champion. And this is what I talk about, right? If you're going to have a mandatory, this dude should be #1 in the rankings. There should not be a WBA world champion. There's a super champion. That is the belt. The world champion is a Reggie belt. Erislandy Lara is not a real champion. And this is what I talk about when I talk about the Reggie belts making the picture cloudy. Because you got, look at this, Erislandy Lara, the WBA world champion. And then you've got Michael Zarafa as the Oceania champion. And this is what I'm talking about. The WBA is a mess. It's a mess. Too many belts. But this is what happens when you don't clean up divisions. And nobody's doing a good job of it. The boxing fans aren't putting enough pressure on the sanctioning bodies, the networks, the promoters, the managers to make these fights, give us the correct fights. It's the sanctioning body's duty to the boxing fans to say, you know what? This is the fight that makes sense next. Let's make the mandatory. Let's make the champion fight the mandatory. And if he doesn't, he gets stripped of his belt. It goes vacant. And the mandatory gets to fight somebody else for the vacant belt. And the former champion can go kick rocks, go fight whoever he wants. It's their duty to do that. It's also their duty to say the unification makes more sense than the mandatory here. So let's go to the unification and try to clear up the process as to who the real champion is and give us the undisputed champion. It's also their duty to say, once we have an undisputed champion, let's cut our sanctioning fees from 3% to 1% each, to where the fighter is only paying a 4% sanctioning fee, to where it's sustainable in order to defend your undisputed championship. Because that's not a thing. It's not a thing for a guy to stick around and defend his undisputed championship, unfortunately, because it's not sustainable. But you think of how far the middleweight division has fallen. And the sanctioning body is part of this. But just think about Bernard Hopkins for a minute. Bernard Hopkins defends and he defends and he defends. And he does it consistently, and he stays active as a fighter. He's a full-time fighter defending until the big fights come to him, and he's got big name fighters from the lower weight class underneath him coming up to try to take his belts, and he knocks out Oscar De La Hoya in the 9th round. He even knocked out a full-blown middleweight Glenn Johnson in the 11th round. He knocked out Felix Trinidad in the 12th round. So you can say what you want about Bernard Hopkins. Oh, he was boring, he was clinchy, he was all this stuff, but this dude, when he had somebody's neck there, he was cutting it. He was knocking guys out late in fights if it was there, if it presented itself. I can name more than a handful of fights, 10 fights that were exciting when it came to Bernard Hopkins, both Jean Pascal fights. But this guy's knocking people out. He's beating real middleweights. He's beating guys trying to move up to middleweight and try to take his crown. And then there's this guy who's 3.5, 4 years in 2004, 2005, named Jermaine Taylor, who decides, you know what, I want to be aggressive here. I want this shot now. I want the undisputed middleweight. People are telling me I'm not ready. I'm a huge underdog. I want to take this shot now. I want to take a shot at the throne now. Lou DiBella makes the fight. Gets Jermaine Taylor the fight. Jermaine Taylor wins as a big underdog, becomes the first undisputed champion to beat the undisputed champion in the 4-belt era. And I still think he's the only one. And then he beats him in a rematch as the underdog again. And then they try to make Jermaine Taylor versus Edison Miranda, and you had big punchers back then. Like I said, Bernard Hopkins could knock guys out if he wanted to. Jermaine Taylor could knock guys out. One punch, power punch like a mule. Edison Miranda punched like a mule. Arthur Abraham punched like a mule. So they're trying to set up Jermaine Taylor versus Edison Miranda. In the process, Kelly Pavlik knocks out Edison Miranda, upsets him. And this is what happens when the fights happen. When the fights happen, upsets happen. And this is why mythical matchups don't work. And this is what I tell the Tank fans. Oh, Tank will beat this guy. Tank will beat that guy. Tank will beat that guy. He doesn't have to fight those fights. If Tank fought those fights, fights just don't happen on paper. Once you get in that ring, upsets happen, especially when you fight consistently against top competition, which is why we should be rewarding fighters who fight top competition often, because you have a greater chance of losing. But Kelly Pavlik knocks out Edison Miranda, upsets those plans. We get Jermaine Taylor versus Kelly Pavlik, and we arguably get the last great fight between two great middleweights in Jermaine Taylor versus Kelly Pavlik. Some people would say they were overrated. I think those people are wrong. Then Kelly Pavlik ends up losing that later on. He wins the rematch with Jermaine Taylor, be losing later on. But my whole point is, middleweight is such a dumpster juice division now that we don't even have great, natural, legit middleweights anymore. We have guys moving up from 154, becoming middleweights because nobody's really there. We got guys that are just traveling through 160 or taking a shot here and there at 160 and moving back down, moving through 160 up to 168. That's how much of a dumpster juice division this is. Sergio Martinez, a great 154-pounder, comes up to 160 and does well at 160 for a while, just because the career middleweights there were not that great. Paul Williams took his shot at 160, moving up from 147. Cotto moves up to 154 to beat Sergio Martinez at 160 and decides, I'm not even a true middleweight here, so I'm not even going to fight true middleweights. I'm not going to fight Gennady Golovkin. No, not happening. So he waits around. He gets to fight with Canelo. You have two junior middleweights fighting at middleweight at the time, I believe at a catchweight. for the lineal middleweight championship of the world. And then once Canelo gets that, finally, Gennady Golovkin gets his shot. Gennady Golovkin at least was the most high over a decade, but even him, after the second Canelo fight, sort of went to oblivion for a while. So it's been a frustrating picture at middleweight. And the frustrating part about it, the most frustrating part is, in order for boxing to live up to its expectations, its true expectations, not only to survive, but what I talk about, to thrive, you need to have the sexy division sexy. Instagram is not what it is without Instagram models, 10s, dudes scrolling through it. If you had a bunch of 2s on Instagram, dudes wouldn't scroll through it. People aren't going to follow boxing the way they would if these sexy divisions were sexier. They would follow it closer. Middleweight's got to be a sexy division. Welterweight's got to be a sexy division. Lightweight's got to be a sexy division. Heavyweight's got to be a sexy division. And if it's not, boxing's not as hot as it would be. So for middleweight to be the dumpster juice division it's been for the past decade plus is unacceptable. And we all have, the blame goes on all of us. It goes on us as fans for not demanding the correct fights, not being persistent enough on it, not being educated enough to know what fights should be made, to push the sanctioning bodies, managers, promoters. It's on the managers and promoters for thinking in the best interest of their fighters and not the sustainability of the sport. And I understand that's the promoter's job to put on the event, the manager's job to look out for the fighter. But at the end of the day, we all need a sustainable sport. We need this thing to grow. And the sanctioning bodies are not doing a good enough job of sweeping this up behind, coming behind and combating the corruption in the sport, because they're corrupt themselves. Everybody's looking out for their own interests, which is fine as long as the checks and balances are there. But we're not looking out for our own interests as fans. And being that we're not looking out for our own interests as fans, we're getting railroaded. This is how we get this picture right here, because this is an ugly picture. This is a nasty picture. This is a middleweight division in which you have a bunch of middleweight champions disinterested in the middleweight division. Is Jamal Charlo at all interested in being undisputed at 160? Is Boo Boo Andre at all interested in being undisputed at 160? Gennady Golovkin is moving up to 168 to try to become undisputed at 168. We're going to find out after the fight if he comes back down and fights Erislandy Lara, if he's at all interested in being undisputed at 160. But when you have a bunch of guys who are disinterested in being the champion in the division, how can a division be great? When you have every single champion in this division not at all interested in clearing up this picture. And I got to give at least Golovkin a little bit of credit, because at least he unified against Murata in Japan. So he's got 2 of the belts. So at least we developed the picture a little bit there. When you got Chris Eubank Jr., who is a top contender and is disinterested in becoming a real champion himself at middleweight, because he's calling out a welterweight, he's calling out Jake Paul after that fight. When you got all that going on, how can you have a great division? It's a mess. I got so many books on sanctioning bodies. Like I said, I'm going to link the video below, Michael Montero's 39-minute video, because I think that's the best video I've seen on YouTube on simplifying who the sanctioning bodies, and I'm not going to bore you on it, the history of them and all that stuff, when they came around, why they came around. But I can tell you the good thing about the sanctioning bodies, if I can tell you the good things about them real quick, is you need them in a global sport. You need multiple of them. And they've done a good job of spreading the belts around through different continents and different countries. And that's why on Calix Boxing, like I said, I put how many countries have so many belts. You have 16 countries represented. It's good that you have a champion from Uzbekistan. It's good that you have a champion from Kazakhstan. It's good that you have a champion from Australia. It's good that we have champions from Thailand. It's good that we have champions from Japan, Mexico, Puerto Rico, Philippines, France, Congo, Russia. Venezuela, Argentina, and of course, USA still has the most belts. USA has 19 belts out of the, what did I say, 68 belts? USA has 19 of them. But it's good that everybody's represented. It's good that there are real belts to give out to fighters who are worthy of it. When the ranking system works, which is seldom, and you don't have the Reggie belts in between, you have a ranking system 1 through 10, fighters deservedly climbing up the rankings, getting a mandatory shot. The champion fights the mandatory. Unifications happen when they're supposed to happen. And undisputed happens. That's the 4-belt system working. And when it works, it proves that it's the correct system. The problem is it's so corrupted at this point that people don't even know where to start to fix it. People don't know where to start. So I don't even know what to do with that. And as Michael Montero pointed out, there have been points where some of these, I believe it was the WBC almost got kicked out of boxing. They almost went under. They almost went under when they are rewarded. Roy Jones moves up to heavyweight. He wins the heavyweight champion against John Ruiz. Then decides, you know what? I don't want to stay at heavyweight anymore. I want to go back down to light heavyweight. Give me my belt back. But they had already rewarded a belt to an Italian fighter. I had it written down here. Who is it? Oh, Rocca Gianni. They gave Rocca Gianni the belt that Roy Jones vacated to move up to heavyweight. Nobody knew who Rocca Gianni was, so they said, you know what? We're giving Roy his belt back. Forget this dude. We're going to break our rules. We're going to give Roy his belt back because he's Roy. And this dude's Rocca Gianni. Nobody's noticed who Rocca Gianni is anyway, so this is going to go under the rug. The problem was Rocca Gianni sued the WBC. And when he sued the WBC for $30 million, he won. He won. And it was going to take the WBC under like the Titanic. The WBC was going to be no mas, no more. But a bunch of fighters, a bunch of promoters, and a bunch of managers went to Rocca Gianni and said, look, man, they're going to go under. This is not good for boxing. This is what you need to do, man. You need to settle with them for something that's reasonable. So Rocca Gianni agreed, and he agreed to a 6-figure settlement instead of a $30 million settlement, and it kept the WBC alive. Had he not agreed to that settlement, the WBC would have went under. We would have no WBC right now. It would have took him under. And the issue with this is, and we talked about the issue with Bob Lee and the IBF. He was getting paid under the table to climb fighters up the rankings. Hey, you want your fighter at number 4? Give me whatever. Give me 20,000. You want your fighter at number 2? You want him to be the mandatory? Give me 100 G's. Whatever it was. He gets paid under the table. Fighters climb the rankings out of nowhere. Bob Lee gets convicted of racketeering, I believe, and he gets kicked out. The issue is, and this is the issue with people not knowing their history and not knowing the history of the sanctioning bodies and the corruption of the sport of boxing, and it looks like it'll be around forever because it's too much to clean up. People don't even know where to start. But the issue with it is, what did the IBF do right after Bob Lee? Nothing. They just stayed course. Nothing was fixed. What did the WBC do after? I mean, they might have cleaned up things for a little while, but it went right back to where it was. What's the WBA going to do here? Oh, look, Leo Santa Cruz versus Lee Wood. We're doing something here. He's the mandatory. We're making Leo Santa Cruz. We're making a fight for you. Hey, Gennady Golovkin, you got to fight Arislandi Lara within 120 days. Look, we're cleaning things up. We're cleaning things up. We're going to take away this belt. We're going to clean things up. We're going to make this, we're going to simplify things. Look at us. They're going to do that for a little while until the WBAs again. This is what they do. This is what they do. If history tells us anything, this ABC company, the Association of Boxing Commissions, they're not going to do a damn thing. They're going to say, oh, look, we're looking into this. Oh, and then it's going to be, oh, we're going to slap the WBA on the wrist. Don't do that again. Don't do it again. Don't do it again. The WBA is going to go, oh, we're not going to do that again. Look at us. Look at us. Look at the halo over our head. We're clean now. We're doing things good. And then a year or two from now, there's going to be a super oceanic belt. More sanctioning fees. And that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. And it's all laughable. It's all laughable. And even hardcore boxing fans don't even know how to follow this stuff. So many belts, totally ridiculous. You are right. Who has a WBA universal title right now? I have no idea. All these belts are ridiculous. This is why casual fans can't follow the sport. I try to explain it to my girl, but she doesn't understand it. Good brain exercise, keeping track of all these belts. That's what I'm saying. Like, people don't want to do that. People have lives. I mean, myself, I just want to see a good fight on a Friday, Saturday night. I want a sport that's easy to follow, and I can't get that. I got a job. I work. I own a business. I got 3 kids. I'm married. I'm not trying to follow all this stuff, but if I want to follow the sport of boxing correctly, I got to follow it. If I want to have a podcast 4 or 5 days a week and properly educate people, I got to follow it. So I got to decide if I want to follow it or just become a casual. That's how complex this is. And you have a growing number of people here in America, and I know universally it's a big sport right now, because in other countries, boxing only has soccer to compete with. Here you got NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, college football, March Madness, and college basketball. You got so many different options in America that people are saying I keep using that analogy, but I think it works. You have the fight, you have the basketball game, you have the football game. Normally, everybody in a sane world, people are going to gravitate towards the combat. They're going to gravitate towards the fight, but the business side of it is so messed up. The politics is so messed up that people are gravitating towards the basketball and the football game because it's a much simpler process to follow. Unfortunately, it's too much to keep up with. WBA Super doesn't have mandatories, if I'm not mistaken, just the WBA regular. Saludos everyone in the chat. And I think the regular eventually becomes the mandatory for the super, if I'm not mistaken. But what I'm saying is the mandatory, how it should work, how it was designed to work, is you have a champion. You call it whatever you want. You can call it a super, you can call it a world, whatever. Let's just call it the WBA championship. You should have a WBA champion here, WBA champion, and then you should have a ranking system 1 through 10, and the number 1 guy is now the main challenger, the mandatory, and he gets a shot at the belt. That's how it should work. And the ranking system should not be corrupted. We've already got judges corrupted. We've already got everybody corrupted. Everybody's reaching into everybody's pockets. And now the ranking system, not now, it's been like that for ages and ages. The ranking system is also corrupted. It's also corrupted. So you don't know where to go for what anymore. And you don't know what's true. You don't know what's up and down. They're making it more difficult to design. It's like the tax code, right? It's like a politician writing a law. They write it complex for a reason. They write it complex because they don't want you to know what's in it. They want it difficult to follow. They don't want you to be able to push back on them. They don't want you to be able to say, hey, you broke your rule here. You broke your rule here. It clearly states it right here. They write it pages and pages and pages and fine print and fine print and fine print and fine print, just so you can't go back to them and say, hey, you broke your rule. You broke your rule. This guy's supposed to be fighting this guy, and the undisputed is supposed to be happening for the mandatory, and they're not supposed to be this many belts. Floyd is a casual head start spinning. Floyd is a hypocrite. Yep. Salute D Nice in the building. Casual's head start spinning. Will the WBA mandate Morrell versus Canelo? Who knows? Who knows? And this is the thing I talk about too. Look, I'm a fan of Canelo's, but rules are rules, and sometimes rules are bent, broken for certain fighters, and I think Canelo will be one of those fighters. There have been exceptions to that rule. WBC did it, mandating Canelo fight Gennady Golovkin, but that's few and far between. Will they mandate it? I don't know. I have no idea. 140 rankings are a sham. That is correct. It's all about money, unfortunately, deflection. This has been going on as long as I can remember. It's on us for not letting it happen. Ryan may be right on the belt topic. Those 2 cats on his own interviewing Ryan ended that interview real quick as soon as Ryan said the belts are worthless. And look, that's another debate as to, are the belts worthless or not? The belts are not worthless. Like I said, belts matter as long as they're real belts. But the belt that Tank has is worthless. It's worthless. As long as the belts have a meaning as to who a fighter is, because we have to have a picture in a division. Every single sport has a ranking system. College football has a top 25 to cite. In the NFL, you have divisions, you have records. You have to be able to say what's up, what's down, who's number one, who's number five, all this good stuff. So you have to have sanctioning bodies to give us good ranking systems, not just publications. And on top of that, you have to have belts that championships that matter. You have to have those. So belts do matter. They do matter, but the real ones matter. And this is where it starts to get confusing again, because it's hard to break down to people, even some boxing fans who follow the sport. It's hard to break down a real belt and what's a Reggie belt. And that's why I call this belts gone wild, because when the belt's gone wild, they scatter people trying to figure out what's what. It's a messed up system. It's screwed up, and it shouldn't be. At least the major sports have a Super Bowl, World Series, and a playoff season. We get a number one. I'm confused whether PBC fighters are part-time only because they never fight more than 1 or 2 times a year, and that's the biggest problem plaguing boxing, and I stand by that. And it's all tied together. D-Style made that point, but part-time fighters, it's not good. It's not good. It's not good when you have 40% of the top 50 pound-for-pound fighters in the world fighting once per year or less. It's not good. Not good at all. I mean, you got like 15 fighters in the top 50 pound for pound who haven't fought yet in calendar year 2022, and we're almost in month 8. It's not good. It's not good. Imagine if all fighters got on the same page and say, hey, we're going to fight at least 2 times per year. Just imagine that. You have 52 weeks in a year. That's 100 fights right there. You'd be having championship fights or top pound for pound fighters, top 50 in the world, fighting every weekend in the sport of boxing on average. Casual don't pay attention to Ryan and Tank on TikTok and Canelo on Mexican holidays. Only pay, yeah. Anyone catch the announcement of Box Azteca teaming up with Zanfer Boxing, Fernando Beltran to televise boxing in Mexico? Julio Cesar Chavez was present at the event. I hope so. That'd be a good deal. JC in the building. One more round. Dump those Reggie belts. Porto Sur Central BXO in the building. Salute, Calix. Salute to you. And I appreciate y'all coming through. And y'all can catch all my videos right here on the channel. Been doing educational videos this week, and I'll be doing the prediction videos separately. They'll be going up on the channel tonight and tomorrow for the fights this weekend as well. So look out for those. And I'll also be on the roundtable with D-Style Boxing on his channel tonight, 7 p.m. Central. Let's see what else we got. This is why very few UFC fighters go undefeated. Most of the GOATs still have at least a couple of L's. That's right, because they're forced into fighting good fights. And there's a clear, UFC is simpler to follow. And I know this because I live in South Louisiana, and UFC is everywhere here. And all of my neighbors, everybody in my neighborhood, they throw UFC parties every month for the pay-per-views. And they all sit there and they can all clearly and concisely tell me who's the guy in this division, how many divisions there are, who's the next guy coming up, who are the prospects. They can tell me that. They can tell me that. And this to me, even as a guy who's not a fan of the UFC, it's just not my cup of tea. Stylistically, I don't like it. But I envy how easily they can tell me what's going on in the sport and how easily I can grasp it, even for a sport I don't follow. I wish I could do the same. I wish I could do the same. I got it, May. Who claims in total seriousness Mayweather can't be beaten by anyone in history? I don't buy that at all. If Mayweather was under a UFC matchmaking system, I'm pretty sure he would have lost. Of course. Of course. Nando in the building. Good to see you, Nando. This is an excellent breakdown. Unfortunately, it should be common sense. And it should be, but in fairness, man, like I said, they make this complex on purpose. They purposely do it just so it's hard for us to follow, just so we give up. But the problem with that is if we give up and lose a sport, leave the sport, there's less eyeballs. Universally, like I said, I think more people are coming into the sport of boxing. It's healthy universally. And I've talked about how great 2022 has been so far, but that could be in comparison to what we've seen before. All I'm saying is this sport can be so much better. This can be the best, the most popular sport in the world if we just got it right, if we just got on the same page. And I know that's a pipe dream. I could only imagine what it'd be like if we all got on the same page. I mean, it's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream. But I'm tired of being told what's unrealistic. This whole thing will not just affect the WBA. The WBC got to mind their P's and Q's as well. And that's what I was talking about earlier, Nando. It's the IBF and the WBO are the newer sanctioning bodies. They both came around in the 80s. 1983, 1988, I believe, 1981, something like that. But they came around in the 80s. And the older ones, the WBO, came around in the 60s. The WBA, which was the NBA, came around in 1921. You would think the more traditional ones would be getting it right, but they're the ones with all the Super Reggie belts. The WBA is the one with the regular, the Super, the interim, the Latin American, the national, the North American, the Pan-African, the Continental, the Intercontinental, the Oceanic. Belts. And that's not even counting the Super World, the Gold World, belts, sanctioning fees. The WBA and the WBC need to get it together and consolidating these belts, simplifying the sport, simplifying the ranking system, and getting rid of a lot of these belts. And I keep hammering this point home as well. As we see more unifications, as we see more people following the Canelo blueprint of last year and cleaning up your division and becoming undisputed, they have to get on the same page, and make it more sustainable to have an undisputed champion, because it's a good thing to have an alpha dog in a division who says, I'm going to stick around in this division and I'm going to take on all the young lions. I'm going to defend my property. This is my property. I earned it. I earned all four of these belts. They're in my trophy case. You got to come into my domain and take these trophies from me. I'm not going to give them up. We can't have a system in which it's unsustainable for these guys to defend their property because it's too expensive for them to do it. We have to see an alpha dog who says, this is my property that I earned. Try to come and take it. You're a young lion. Okay, you're a young lion. Sanctioning body, mandate me to fight this dude. He's a top contender. Mandate me to fight this dude. They mandate him to fight this dude. Come take my belts. Come try to take all four of my belts. Jermaine Taylor did that against Bernard Hopkins. Took all four of his belts out of his trophy case. Took his straps. But we have to have a sustainable system in which you can defend all undisputed. It's a problem. It's a problem, and we're seeing it. We're seeing Josh Taylor say it's not worth it. It's not worth it. We're already seeing Devin Haney say, I'll go to 140. I'll go to 140. It can't be a meaningful thing if it's not sustainable. You already have people saying, now that we've seen so many undisputed, it's not what it was built up to be. Ryan Garcia Tank Davis is bigger than Devin Haney, who has all four belts. So we have to make it more meaningful. The only way we can do that is to make it more sustainable, to keep those belts. You're a young lion. You're that dude. You say you're that dude. Come take my belts. Come take them. And then the alpha dog kicks that guy out. Nope, keeping my belts. Give me the next mandatory. Give me the next one. That's why I like Jermell Charlo right now, and I think he's that dude because he won those belts at 154, and he's sticking around at 154. He's not moving up to 160. He's sticking around at 154 and says, you think Tim Tszyu's that dude? Mandate him. Mandate it. Mandate that fight. Let's see what happens. They mandate the fight. Come on, bring it. January, meet me. Meet me. Let's see who deserves these belts. Let's see if you can take these belts off me. Come see. Come see. We need more of that in boxing. Dudes trying to consolidate all the straps, and this is where belts matter. Dudes trying to consolidate all the belts and then saying, come take this property from me. I'm sticking around. Come take it. Let's see what happens. See what happens. Mess around and find out. That's why I like Jermell Charlo. Because it's not common sense is why a lot of dummies start enabling their favorite fighter to duck true challenges. Good comment. It's not true. There are a lot of other big sports in the UK, rugby, cricket, to name a few. Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't know the culture of the UK. All I'm saying is I don't think those sports are as big as NBA, NFL, that are universal sports as well. They've grown out. I think that shows how big they are here in America. NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, huge, huge. It's a lot to compete against in America when you have so many different options and people are looking for something simple to follow. What's good, West Side in the building? Government regulation is needed. I'm not so sure about that. That's a whole different topic that we can get into. I'm not so sure about that. Linux was best. I'm from the UK, and nobody I know watches cricket or rugby yet. Everyone watches boxing and big fights. At least, like I said, that's a different conversation. I'm just not educated enough to talk about. So maybe I spoke out of turn saying that in the UK, all they have to compete against is soccer. I don't know. But universally, the sport is better. I mean, it's great. It's great. Universally, it's grown. It's grown its tentacles out. But here in America, it can do a lot better to thrive. It can do a lot better. UFC, I'm a fan, but they changed the pay-per-view main event for McGregor to fight a guy, and Cowboy coming off 3 straight back is all by first-round KOs. Yeah, and fair enough. In the UFC, I know from speaking to UFC fans, they have their stuff too. But overall, it's a clear and concise, more clear and concise sport to follow. Everybody bends and breaks their rules for certain people who have a lot of leverage. And I'm sure Conor McGregor still, and I don't understand it. I don't understand the aura of Conor McGregor, but I'm sure he has a lot of leverage to where they would bend their rules, much like Canelo here in boxing. Everybody has their thing. The fighting once or twice a year is killing the sport. That's right. I agree the cost is an issue, but some undisputed champs don't have to pay the sanctioning fees. Yeah, and I'll have to look more into that, but from what Josh Taylor said, he paid 11% from what I saw. Certain guys can use their leverage to bring down those percentages. I just think there has to be a rule put in place. The sanctioning bodies have to come together, all 4 presidents, and say, you know what, if a guy becomes undisputed, we have to knock our sanctioning fee down from 3% to 1% each, to where a fighter is only paying 4% sanctioning fee in order to defend all 4 belts, because this is what's better for the sport. And the sanctioning bodies are supposed to be for the betterment of the sport. And we know they're not. It's corruption, but it's a problem, man. I'm telling you. And it's a problem that's going to keep happening when guys become undisputed and just say it's not sustainable to defend all 4 belts. And I might as well just drop them, or I might as well just go somewhere else. And even if they drop the belts and stay in they drop the belts. Like if Josh Taylor decided he wanted to stay at 140 long term, but he just dropped 2 belts, what sense does that make for the sport? Got to catch the show on the playback. Shout out Chauncey Pearls on a weekly National Bay boxing pulls down better ratings than MLS, baseball, and NHL. I'll have to look into that, and that's a good thing. If so, it's a good thing. Bill could be lying. No, he said ESPN paid them. On that note, man, we're an hour and 12 minutes in. I appreciate y'all. Y'all go look back at the playback of this whole thing. And I got so much other things I could talk about with sanctioning bodies that I'll probably do another one next week, because there's so many things in my notes I didn't get to. But I'll put the link to Michael Montero's video underneath. It's a good simplification of the sanctioning bodies. And I'll also, in the future, put links to books that I have when it comes to sanctioning bodies. If you want to read the history of sanctioning bodies, how they started, why they started, and how we got to this point, I'll drop those links as well. So on that note, man, I'll see y'all tonight.